Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the CINECA webinar series. Today, Tony Burdett from EMBL-EBI will present Data Gravity in the Life Sciences, Lessons Learned from the Human Cell Atlas and other federated data projects. My name is Marta Llorell Linares, and I'm involved in the CINECA project on behalf of EMBL-EBI. Before I introduce you to the speaker, I would like to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be made available on the CINECA website. We have reserved some time at the end of the session for audience questions and answers. So if you have any questions, you can write them down on the question box in the GoToWebinar application. And you can write them as we go along, or you can write them at the end. We'll read them all at the end. I will briefly introduce the CINECA project. CINECA stands for Common Infrastructure for National Cohorts in Europe, Canada, and Africa. And it's a 4-year project funded by the European Union Horizon 2020 program and the Canadian Institute of Health Research. CINECA's vision is to accelerate disease research and improve health by facilitating transcontinental human data exchange. To achieve this, there are several challenges that CINECA works on. The first one is federated data discovery. So if you're a researcher and want to find a specific cohort data, how can you find this? And you could be looking for specific genotypes or phenotypes, for example. And once you find the data you're interested in, how do you get permission to access it? So CINECA is working on an interoperable authentication and authorization infrastructure. And once you have get access to the data, it's really important that there's a harmonized model metadata across the cohort so that you can do research questions across different cohorts. The ultimate aim of CINECA is to allow for federated data analysis in both research and healthcare applications. And to do that, CINECA has a set of demonstrators across cohorts in research and clinical settings. And on top of these challenges, there is a fundamental need for a transnational harmonized LC framework to address the ethical, legal, and societal issues. In addition, CINECA has an outreach and training program to increase awareness and capacity building in these areas. If you would like to be kept informed of the progress of the CINECA project and any activities that we may organize, you can follow us on Twitter at CINECA Project or check our website, cineca-project.eu. Today's presenter, Tony Burdett, leads the archival infrastructure and technology team at EMBL-EBI, which develops services and provides technology to support the activities of EMBL-EBI's molecular archives, including data submission, storage, validation, coordination, and presentation. Tony joined EMBL-EBI in 2005 and has personally built and led development teams for many resources, such as the GWAS catalog, Array Express, the Expression Atlas, and biosamples. His team now develops the ingestion service for the Human Cell Atlas Data Coordination Platform, EMBL-EBI's Unified Submission Interface, and the biosamples database. At this point, I will hand over to Tony.
Thanks, Marta. Thanks for the introduction. I will take it away. So I should thank Marta and the CINECA folks for giving me the opportunity to talk today. This is kind of a new talk, really, about data gravity. So you guys are hearing it for the first time. I love feedback on whether these ideas resonate with you. So please let me know what you think. What I should say, first of all, is this is quite a high-level talk. There's quite a lot of big picture, sort of wide thinking in this presentation, and it really is a sort of distillation of lessons learned from building services that are important for this federated ecosystem that Marta described quite nicely as being important to CINECA, amongst other projects. This is really a direction of travel. I think the people that will be most interested in this talk will be people that have like kind of worked in these sort of federated data projects, or are trying to build services for data as part of global collaborations. But there's really lessons here for everyone that kind of works with data, is designing workflows, or is actually just trying to collect and harmonize data from all over the world. So that's sort of the introduction. Just to give you a little bit of context about myself, Marta gave a great introduction at the start. As she said, I joined EBI in 2005. My background's originally biological, actually, but I spent some time at medical school to start with. But since I joined EBI, my career has been pretty heavily focused on service engineering and bioinformatics. I built a lot of resources myself. I did some coding on them. I've run the development teams and really been part of several really big collaborations to sort of pull data together and make it available at a very large scale. There's a little list of things here. My team also develops the backend infrastructure for the European Nucleotide Archive as well. So we work at this at a really big scale. So my team is very heavily focused on this kind of big data ecosystem. So hopefully the lessons that we've learned we can share with you. I should, full disclosure to start with, I didn't actually coin the term data gravity. I think the first reference I can find to it is from 2010 by a guy called Dave McCrory. The link to his blog, where I think he originally coined the term, is here. Other people have used it as well. I know that Amazon use it quite often to refer to the sort of tendency of data to collect services and applications where that data lives. So big data tends to draw other data and services and applications to it. And this is kind of known in the cloud providers. It's something that we're sort of learning in the life sciences right now. This is my own spin on it, though. So just to launch straight in with a slightly sort of cheeky equation, I tend to think about data gravity of any given data set being the product of the size of that data set. We call that V in this slide. The regulatory restrictions, like ethical legal frameworks, regulations inside national boundaries, and whether you're actually able to share that data, whether it's patient confidential data that shouldn't leave the hospital, for example, whether you're a pharmaceutical company and you've got proprietary data sets, that increases the gravity of your data set. Things that reduce the gravity of your data set are things like the bandwidth. So how fast is your internet connection from where the data lives to where you want it to be, and the cost of compute and the cost of the storage of the data. So the cheaper the storage, the cheaper the storage in that location, the cheaper the compute, the less you want to move it. So there's kind of this sort of rough equation that you can sort of use to think about how much gravity a particular data set or a cohort data set might have. And if we think about it like this, you know, there's some data sets that are very big. I sort of think of there's big things in the center being data sets like you could think of ENA as being one of these really big data sets, for example, and that will draw services towards it. And we want to be thinking about how do we bring other data sets into the same orbit. So how do we bring data closer together so that we can combine it and add some value and figure out how we're going to analyze those data sets together. But you could also think about how do we journey between those data sets? How do we federate our analysis? So how do we send our analysis workflows from one data set to the next in order to be able to process these disparate data sets? For CINECA, this might look like multiple different cohorts. So the bigger cohorts like the UK Biobank data might be in the middle. and we might want to ship analysis processes to run next to the big data sets and then sort of like fire them out to smaller ones, or maybe we want to download and relocate the smaller ones. I'll dive a bit deeper into these concepts as I go. This is the trailer for the rest of the talk. So I think the question there is why does it matter? Why do we care? What difference does it make to us when we're starting to think about data gravity? Now, first and foremost, we know that science isn't a local endeavor. The data doesn't all live in one place, and neither do the researchers. I always like this map of who uses EBI services. Life sciences and bioinformatics is truly global undertaking. We get requests from all over the world for data sets that we hold. People are downloading them all the time. So we really need a good network in place to ship data from one part of the world to another, and actually exploit the data across the world. We also know that the genomic data generation landscape is changing. So if you look back in time to 2012 and 2017, the number of whole genomes and whole exomes that are in existence that were funded purely by healthcare initiatives, purely from patients in hospitals, was low. It was 1% in 2012, up to 20% in 2017. But we know, looking forward in just a couple of years, that that this is going to be high. It's going to be over 80%. We're seeing this trend right now, and indeed, this is one of the reasons that the CINECA project exists in the first place, is to try and address this challenge of more and more data being generated in a healthcare context, so generated in hospitals, whole genomes being generated from patients in hospitals and in healthcare settings, and then how do we actually exploit that data? It's not going to be restricted to a few laboratories or big sequencing centers anymore. And I borrowed this slide from Jessica. It's one of the CINECA slides about the number of initiatives of large-scale human cohort sequencing initiatives that are present around the world. So you see the countries on this map that have sort of sequencing projects, medical genome sequencing projects underway, some sort of active or planning either in the active phase or in the planning phase for collecting genomic data from patients. And the red dots here illustrate cohorts. So the dark red is national cohorts with over 100,000 genotypes. And you see this is growing. The scale at which this undertaking is growing is taking place, is growing all the time. There's more and more data, more and more globally dispersed. And to address those challenges, I think we know the benefits of bringing compute to the data. So again, I borrowed this slide from GA4GH, and the GA4GH initiative heavily focused on these sorts of initiatives about making sure that it's easier to bring compute to the data, so we don't have to sort of pull data from all over the globe into these giant data warehouses in one place. Bringing the compute to the data has these big benefits, like you can compute on demand, you can process data within a particular jurisdiction. You don't have to make multiple copies of the data over and over again. You can manage the security by appropriately firewalling out particular data sets and restricting access to them. And you can improve tools and improve discovery. So given that we know the benefits, this nudges us towards this kind of idea, this like package the compute up in your little rocket on this diagram and ship it around the solar system, collecting data sets, analyzing them, and then shipping the results to the next planet as you go. And that pushes us in that direction. However, this is not the only thing that's happening in the current climate. So we know some of the big data resources, and I've got a slide from Stephen Newhouse, the head of technical services at EBI here, that shows the growth of the data that we have at EBI from 2015 to 2019, and the total volume of data that we serve is rapidly increasing, both in terms of what we store, what we collect, and in terms of the number of requests for that data. They're increasing all the time. and we need to invest in infrastructure to do that. Now, that investment in infrastructure doesn't necessarily get matched across the globe. There's certain places where investment in infrastructure is very heavy, and other places where it's lighter. So that nudges us in the other direction, suggesting that there are certain places that can handle these very big data sets. And then there's arguments to be made for pulling data towards these kind of big venues, large data centers. And some of that can utilize cloud technology. Some of it uses private clouds. EBI, other Elixir nodes have their own centers set up. And of course, commercial cloud providers, pharmaceutical companies also have their own cloud setup. So we really need to find this kind of blend, and understanding the gravity of a data set tends to help us think about whether we should be moving it, whether we should be bringing other data sets to it, or whether we should be moving analysis workflows between those data sets in a more federated manner. Of course, we want to avoid a singularity where there's a black hole at the center and it consumes all the data from everywhere else, because that we know is not sustainable in the long term. So just to think a little bit more about that, I pulled this kind of cartoon together that sort of might reflect a sort of real workflow that you might want to do. So here I've used the little purple rings to show locations where data might be analyzed. So if we imagine that I'm a researcher in the UK, and what I set myself is a challenge of identifying a drug target for a particular type of disease, let's say pancreatic cancer, and I want to try and identify a new drug, and maybe I'm working for a pharmaceutical company that has a red proprietary firewall data set in the west coast of the US. Where I might start from is I might want to do a really kind of broad GWAS analysis. So maybe I want to pull pancreatic cancer. I want to pull genotypes from pancreatic cancer patients all over the world, including like UK. I maybe use some UK biobank data. I use some data from the Estonia biobank, from South Africa, H3 Africa, and pull all of these genomic data sets. If I can, I want to download them all myself and analyze them and do a GWAS analysis on all of those genotyping data sets in one place. And then maybe I want to compare the variants that I find in that data set to some like reference annotation data sets to see if I can predict the genes that those variants might be influencing. And so maybe I pull some reference annotation data sets in, and then I say, okay, well, I've got this kind of nice set of summary results that I think are gene expression patterns that might be useful. And actually, I need to compare it to like a proprietary database in my pharmaceutical company of drugs targets. So actually, I'm going to have to ship my summary results to the west coast of the US and compare them to what's in the database there. But because it's only summary results that I'm sending, it's actually quite simple to move that. It's not a very big file. It's not like downloading terabytes of genotyping datasets, which I've already had to do. So this is kind of like a sort of semi-realistic cartoon scenario. And there's another option to this. Rather than downloading all those data sets at the start and building my analysis in one place, maybe I could figure out how to split my analysis up into a set of smaller analyses, do a more federated GWAS analysis, and then combine the results. And CINECA, I think, is leading the way in this kind of approach, and I'll come to that in a second. So really what this kind of pushes us towards is this idea where we want to see this kind of global federated research platform. We want to be able to use data from all over the world and perform a set of analyses on it, or potentially we could manage all over the world, ideally taking as much compute to the data as we could. So packaging up our analysis and sending it to run where the data lives, trying to minimize moving these very high gravity data sets around. And I sort of think about two pillars. Marta at the very start presented the 5 challenges that CINECA has, and I think these resonate nicely. I've sort of distilled them down here into these kind of 2 big pillars. One is that this sort of challenge of building this platform around a federated data ecosystem. So can we discover the data? Can we get access to it in a federated manner? Is it interoperable enough to be able to compare data sets from two completely different locations in the same tools? And then the other part of that, the other pillar, is this kind of federated workflow execution environment. So is it even possible for me to package up my workflow and send it to Australia where it can run on some sort of compute node? And is there an appropriate execution environment that guarantees that I get the same results as if I downloaded the data for myself and ran it on my own laptop? So they're the sort of two big pillars. There are several bottlenecks and barriers in a way of achieving this kind of like this utopia. The first one is fair data. So we know that the challenge of harmonizing metadata and ensuring that data is fair, it is high. Data science are core elements of health research and innovation, and actually there's a lot of investment in this area in biopharma research. And the impact and reuse of data is growing rapidly, but a huge amount of time and effort is spent assembling and harmonizing data. So these numbers are from a Forbes article. They did a survey and identified that data scientists spend like nearly 80% of their time simply assembling and harmonizing data to get it into a suitable form where they can utilize it. So and the 60% of this figure here shows actually just cleaning and organizing the data. That's a huge challenge and a huge bottleneck to realizing this kind of federated data ecosystem. If 60% of your time is spent cleaning data and organizing it in a way that is suitable for your analysis, having to do that like remotely is a big challenge, because you end up regenerating a data set that's bespoke to your needs. And we know this is a problem. The FAIR Plus project that I'm one of the work package leaders for is spending a lot of time and effort trying to address this challenge. And there is some research that's been done within the European Union about the cost of the actual cost of not having fair data not having research data be truly fair. And the numbers are huge, like 26 billion euros per year in Europe is spent. And that tallies quite nicely with the data scientists spending 80% of their time. You know, that's where a big chunk of that money goes. But we also, so for the not having well harmonized data is a big challenge, big bottleneck to realizing this dream. We also know that data federation is a bottleneck, and we're doing a good job of addressing this one as a community. So we know that there are national genomic initiatives in many European countries, and Federated EGA is a system for actually meeting some of those challenges. So it's a harmonized platform for human data discovery, access, distribution, coordination. And they're starting to solve some of these challenges in a coordinated way. So you get some guarantees that you know that there's kind of these big central EGA centers that take international submissions and help desk, but there's also local EGA nodes that can host data locally and share the relevant bits of metadata to enable their data to be discovered and utilized appropriately. And this really then starts to build this kind of EGA community around this idea of hosting data locally, but sharing kind of metadata and making your data discoverable in a way that is fair. The other bottleneck is the idea of reproducible research, and I borrowed this slide from the eScience lab at the University of Manchester, because I think it's a really nice overview of how we need to sort of move towards this kind of federated system of being able to do reproducible research, and the EOSC Life project is invested in this as well. So you see these ideas where we have tools developers who can package their tools up in a way that is portable and expose them through things like the BioTools registry, and end users who need to use those tools and are maybe looking to produce analysis workflows can exploit things like Galaxy project or Nextflow to execute their workflows and record them in a particular type of way. So, and standards play a really important part of this space as well. So being able to describe your analysis workflow in things like the common workflow language is really important. And depositing your results in a registry, again, is quite useful. And things like biocontainers allow you to package up all the infrastructure that you might have used to do that analysis. And on the one hand, this is important for reproducibility, but it's also really important for federation. So if I know that I can write my workflow in a common workflow language, and I know that it works with certain workflow execution tools, then I can have some degree of confidence that when I send that workflow to run in a Galaxy instance that's hosted in the US or in Australia or in Japan, that the results that I get back should be the same. And that's a critical bottleneck to making the stream a reality. Now, I mentioned that CINECA is kind of leading the way on this sort of federated analysis. There's a whole work package of CINECA devoted to this. The people in my team are actually working as part of CINECA as part of work package 3, very much focused around metadata representation and harmonization, but that's a sort of precursor then to enabling this stream of federated research and doing things like federated GWAS analyses. I think this is a really important frontier to be able to push forward on this and realize this dream, because without this, I think there's no real tangible way to think about bringing compute to the data. So kind of just a summary of that little part, I think in order to send the compute to the data in a sort of real global way, we need global data storage and analysis infrastructures, but we know that actually generating truly portable analysis workflows is complex. And we don't have good solutions yet, but there is work in progress to build them. We still need to build some pretty high-powered spacecraft to move us between these data locations, the planets in my data gravity analogy. I think it's an exciting time to be working on this. And as I say, I think CINECA is doing a really good job of leading the way here. There's a whole other talk that people probably more knowledgeable than me could do about generating these truly portable analysis workflows and when you should be able to split your analysis up into different parts and then combine results in a big meta-analysis versus when you actually have to ship summary results from one location to the next. I don't want to go into that today. I think this kind of idea of overcoming this data gravity problem, so when do we move data, when do we ship data around, versus when do we send our analysis to it, depends on these kind of number of factors that I highlighted as part of my equation. It's how much does it cost to compute, what's the network bandwidth, are the data sharing regulations, what do the data volumes look like, and this all costs money. It's expensive. It's expensive in terms of cost, whether that's building infrastructure or paying for commercial cloud providers, and it's expensive in terms of people, because you probably need to modernize many of the services that we have in place. You need to package your tools up in containerized ways. You have to figure out how to do all this kind of more complicated federated analysis, and that's a sort of people problem. There's a tendency, I think, to think that actually it's fine, we'll just do it all in the cloud. That's the answer. If we just go cloud native, everyone will be fine, we'll have solved this problem. And I want to talk a little bit about the Human Cell Atlas at this point, because we thought about this at the start of the Human Cell Atlas project in sort of 3 years ago now, the Human Cell Atlas Data Coordination Platform project. And I want to talk a little bit about how that's kind of worked out. So the Human Cell Atlas is profiling sort of millions of human cells, and it's a global effort requiring hundreds of labs, organ-specific data from all over the world, and there's many different experimental techniques and data types. And integrating data at that kind of scale is exactly this problem that we've been talking about in the first half. So we need next generation technology, next generation infrastructure, and some real thinking about how we're going to combine that data and analyze it. My team works on the Human Cell Atlas Data Coordination Platform, and that seeks to bridge disparate data and disparate data, tools, and research from all over the world. So we're trying to bring that data, tools, and research together into a public platform. That's the Human Atlas Data Coordination Platform. And we seek for that platform to be comprehensive, to support all sorts of cellular resolution data, inclusive and representative of the sort of diversity around the world, organized in ways that are accessible. So this is the FAIR data principles, and very dynamic, because we know that the field is moving fast. This is at a very high level how the DCP data flow works. So we draw single cell data from labs. We have a set of standardized pipelines that we use to process the data. Data is made accessible to researchers via the data coordination platform data browser. There's a portal, and researchers can use community tools to work with that data, both by downloading it or by using the cloud platform, the platform itself. So this is then starts to think about, like, we engineered this in a way that is very sort of cloud native. So I'm not going to go into this diagram in a lot of detail, but you see we collect data from data contributors, and my team at the EBI build the ingestion services in the cloud that utilizes AWS technology and Mongo. We utilize the Terra platform that the Broad Institute in Boston have been involved in developing, and the data browser is developed by the University of California, Santa Cruz, and we really do this kind of harmonization at scale, analysis using kind of common pipelines that are packaged up and executed in the cloud, and then present data through cloud-based portals. And you can work in this entire ecosystem without ever downloading any data. But it's quite interesting when you see what the users of the platform actually do. So I've got some statistics here. This is when you go dive into the data coordination platform portal. You see there's an interesting dynamic happens. The pie chart at the left, the top right here, shows the number of data access requests that we received. There's 2,671 in Q3 2020, and you can see the sort of purple and the blue and the green and the sort of pale green components are actually data downloads, whether that's metadata or raw or analyzed data. The number of people that downloaded the data versus this narrow green slice at the top, the number of requests that we got to check out data to the Terra analysis platform and work with it in the cloud, is vanishingly small. Now, you know, I don't want to overinterpret this, but it does tell me that given a choice, researchers are still downloading data over analyzing it in the cloud. And so what lessons did we learn from this? I think the sort of the fundamental message is that cloud native engineering is not enough to change the behavior of users. So when you pick through what we've done, the DCP adopted this kind of heavy cloud native engineering approach. I thought and I still think that that's exactly the right thing to do. We want to be encouraging the world to bring their compute to the data, and we have data in the cloud. We have the ability to bring your compute to it. The services that we ended up building are sort of somewhat traditional. There's a data archive component for both raw and summary results, and there are analysis pipelines that you can execute in the data coordination platform, and that looks not hugely different to what EBI and CBI have been doing historically, and sort of the way that the community has been going for a while. The fact that it's engineered with cloud technology basically has no impact to the users of the platform. They don't really care. The consequence of the cloud engineering means that all the data lives in AWS or the Google Cloud Platform and in the East Coast of the US, which makes it very expensive to download. So when we look at this kind of pattern of downloads versus checkouts to the cloud, this is really, really costly. and it's more costly, arguably, than storing the data in an archive at the EBI and downloading it, because we've had a long history of doing that, and there's a lot of infrastructure in place. It's not pay-per-use like it would be with AWS. AWS and Google Cloud clearly don't want you to download the data; they want you to work with it in the cloud. The analysis platform is available, but it's underused. And I think the interesting thing is, why is the analysis platform underused? And I want to talk about that next. So really what we set out to do was to build this kind of ecosystem, and we need this kind of expensive, high-powered spaceships to travel between our heavy gravity data nodes. What we've got right now is all of the pieces, but we need to assemble them. And the cautionary tale, I think, in all of this is that there's no cloud. It's just other people's computers. So you can re-engineer your services and run them in the cloud, but now you're just using Amazon's computers instead of those that maybe you already owned. And there's strategic implications to this. So data gravity in the life sciences, I think, tells us that we need a culture change. We need to sort of push this component to say, not just build services that enable people to bring their compute to the data, but actually we need to change the culture to make that happen. And the 4 challenges that I've listed here about what we might need to federate data and analysis are here. So we know that we need good standards. We need data providers and data consumers to adopt those standards and adopt the services that we develop, and we also need to know we have a good understanding and really consider data gravity. It isn't always just the right choice to put your data in the cloud and then send your analysis to it. That can be expensive, especially if you still need to download the data. Actually doing these 4 things requires skills. It requires incentives, and it requires funding. We will have to re-engineer some of the established pipelines and tools that we use to be able to run them in the cloud. So just to think about those kind of 4 challenges, standards is a long established one. This is probably the most overused slide in bioinformatics. We know that standards proliferate. There are great standard setting organizations that we don't need to go and try and reinvent standards. We should be looking to trust things like GA4GH to do this for us. And we know that fair data is an enabler for this digital transformation. And this also has a lot of uptake at the minute. I myself am involved in the Fair Plus project. There's things like the Pistoia Alliance, there's Go Fair, and a number of other fair data initiatives that are in play at the minute. So the fair data principles are gathering traction. This is specifically about big pharmaceutical companies, but it's true across the community. I think awareness of the fair data principles and the need for them is well ingrained in the community right now, and the challenges now are just changing the culture again to make this real. The adoption is happening, and I love this example that I saw in a presentation the other day about the COVID-19 data portals initiative. Again, where my team's involved in some of this at the EBI, but there are data portals in Poland and in Sweden and in Japan that really represent this kind of global ecosystem of data with standards at play to make sure that the portals present the same information in kind of the same way, creating this kind of truly global network of COVID data that that is in place and interchangeable. So there's good news, I think, is the message, but we need to focus on it. So the big thing then is actually about the big remaining challenge is about driving data consumer adoption. And just to finish up, these are kind of my top tips, I think, from what I've seen working on the number of projects that I've presented today and elsewhere. So I think the biggest one is to identify good measures of value. So what can you do? What could a data consumer do faster or cheaper or better? And can you use that to identify a path? So, for example, how many people are using your cloud platform versus downloading data? We've done this work within the Human Cell Atlas. We know that we've got a challenge to encourage people to use the cloud platform more, and we can start to measure when where our efforts have an impact. I think the second tip is to start small and expand. So big re-engineering efforts are costly. We've been very lucky to be part of the Human Cell Atlas Data Coordination Platform, which is a well-funded initiative that's really transformative. But it's costly and it's risky, and we've had to iterate a few times and change the way that we're building the infrastructure, just because we've started to look like we're falling behind the rate of change in the field, and that's very, very easy to do even when you're very, very well funded. So start small, use those good measures of value to sort of try and identify whether you're having an impact and whether your users really are sending their compute to the data. Find some exemplars, I think, is my third tip. So, you know, things like that I've talked about today, like Federated EGA and the COVID data portals, they're smaller sets of data that are high value, and you can pilot those approaches within certain communities. That's really can be really impactful. And the final one, I think, is there's a huge need to invest in training and outreach. Even if the data's federated and even if the cloud platform exists, many bioinformaticians, many users of that data just don't have the skills to exploit them. It does require a mindset shift. You have to stop thinking about downloading data sets and start thinking about how I organize my analysis workflow in a way that I can package it up on that space rocket and send it around. So really, we're sort of seeking the best of both there. We want to try and bring high gravity. We want to leave the high gravity data sets in place, bring the smaller ones into orbit around them to make it simpler, but also enable the scenario where you can send your like little space rocket around this system with its federated analysis. And just a reminder of the equation that I posited. I will finish there and take questions. I have to acknowledge the hard work of my whole team at the EBI and the funding and the number of initiatives that we're involved in, which is sort of fed into this kind of like thought experiment that I've been doing, that I've shared with you today. And I will go away and do my lines at that point. So can I please questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, Tony. So we have two questions that we received during the registration process, and we also have one question that has already arrived today. So I'll go through all of those. The first one is how to move terabytes of data up and down to the cloud when bandwidth is not the same among different groups?
Yeah, so indeed, that's a challenge. I hope that sort of over my talk today, I've sort of nudged away from the idea that this is something that we should be trying to do. Moving data down from the cloud is a big challenge and is an expensive thing to do. We want to try and create a scenario where we do much less of that. There is investment in infrastructure, in national infrastructures, and initiatives like Elixir play a really important role in ensuring that data can be shared in a more global manner. But yeah, this is still a challenge. You can also leverage commercial cloud providers. It's actually difficult to sort of compete with AWS and Google in terms of how quickly they can ship data around the globe, and certainly that's something that we at the EBI have been looking at in terms of, can we use AWS, can we use Google Cloud platforms to mirror our data to other places in across the globe. So I hope I answered that question. It's not easy, is the short answer.
Thank you, Tony. So another question is, what are the main factors that convince in Europe to pass control over their data to a trusted repository?
That's a great question and a really difficult one for me to answer. I would say that I think it's a balancing act. That developing sort of trusted repositories is not an easy or trivial thing to do. especially with sort of increasing like sensitivity around data privacy and data governance, which is absolutely the right thing to be doing, but governments all over the world are more sensitive about data sharing challenges. Everyone wants data to be secure, and that doesn't come cheap. So I think the blend of, is there incentives versus is there punishments to do this, maybe is a challenge at the minute. I think there are trusted resources, and the incentives for handing data over to those trusted repositories is very much around, you know, those repositories will look after those issues of security. And I had a slide near the start that talked about the benefits of sending compute to the data. I know the Federated EGA project has been thinking very hard about how to ensure that all of the nodes in that Federated EGA ecosystem have some sort of oversight and governance in terms of whether they are secure. I think partnership and collaboration is the most important thing here, and things like Elixir, GA4GH are great initiatives for ensuring that collaboration can take place.
Thank you, Tony. So we move to the next question, which says, the need to download a data set sometimes comes from a research group wanting to use it alongside their own data sets. What solutions do you propose to address this kind of need?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question in terms of which data set moves, and my sort of slightly mock equation should enable you to say, actually, should I, as a research group, should I share my data to the cloud, put it in a federated analysis platform so that I can move my data set to be closer to the big data set, the heavy gravity one, if that's the one that I want to compare to, or is the reverse situation the case? So if I use the Human Cell Atlas as an example, ideally what we'd have within the Human Cell Atlas data coordination platform is a very large cohort of cellular resolution data that you could use to compare your own data set against. You're never going to really want to download all of that data. It will be terabytes, petabytes potentially. But ensuring that you as a researcher can upload your data into a cloud environment and analyze it in a secure way without necessarily having to share it with the whole world before you're ready to, is a really important challenge, and one that things like the Human Cell Atlas and other initiatives are sort of working towards. So we need to do better, I think, to ensure that you genuinely got a platform where you can upload your data into it and run your workflow in that platform. But this is the sort of way that we're going in the current environment.
Thank you. So the next question is, you mentioned about the difficulty of integrating data that is not fair. Is that a challenge that you face within HCA, given that your data coordination platform uses a well-defined metadata schema for submission?
So yes, and we think this is the right way to do it. We have a well-defined metadata schema for submission, but of course, the challenge of harmonizing data that's being contributed to the Human Cell Atlas platform is one that we then face. That problem hasn't gone away, we've just sort of moved it. So there's several people in my team are involved in data wrangling activities for the Human Cell Atlas, and what they do is work quite closely hand in hand with the researchers who are generating the data, to teach them how to generate their data and structure their data in a way that is compatible with our metadata schemas. So the data within the Human Cell Atlas data coordination platform is well harmonized, but that's because we've had to do the work before it got there, not afterwards. And it really moves this cost so that that 80% of data scientists spending their time cleaning and harmonizing the data, we will slash that problem completely, hopefully, for data that researchers download out of the Human Cell Atlas data coordination platform. But we've moved that cost to be much closer to where the data is generated. And within my team, we talk about this as being data that's sort of born fair. We want to try and ensure that data is fair as soon as it's generated, and that's a big challenge. We think that's the right way to do it. We think it means that all of the researchers that use the data subsequently don't have to do the same thing, the same data cleaning exercise, because we've done it in advance.
Thank you, Tony. So next one is, you talked about data consumer. FAIR require data producer to do extra work. What incentive do they have to do it?
Yeah, good. It's a good question, and I was involved in quite an interesting discussion just at a conference the other day, which I think I would point to pharmaceutical companies as the real litmus test for this. So we work with quite a lot of big pharma in the FAIR Plus project. Pharmaceutical companies will not invest in anything that doesn't have a tangible return on their investment. But pharmaceutical companies are investing heavily in FAIR data at the minute, and most of the reasons that they cite for it is it enables them to track their own data assets much better. So rather than ending up regenerating data sets that maybe they could have exploited previously, that having a good understanding of their data assets actually both helps them in terms of reducing the cost for themselves of actually going back and regenerating data, but also it actually helps them to make novel findings. So I think fair data doesn't mean just sort of ensuring that someone else can use your data more easily. It helps you work with your data more easily as well. I have a whole other presentation that I can do about the reduction in cost if you generate data according to the FAIR principles at the point of generation, rather than sort of having to do that downstream when it comes to sort of submitting that data to a journal, for example. So yes, I think there's a lot of things. I think in general the concern that it ends up being more work is not usually the case. Maybe the first time or the second time you do it, it's a little bit more costly than it would be. At the start, you have to think about how to generate your data in a way that's fair, where maybe you didn't before. But the cost savings that you realize later when you have processes for generating fair data and you have good oversight over your data assets and you have good data management plans, it very quickly gives you a return on that investment to set up data as being fair in the first place.
Thank you, Tony. So I guess we need to consider organizing that as another webinar in the future. But we still have a couple of questions here. So could it be that the cloud analysis platforms don't fully cater the needs of the scientific community yet? Would a better understanding of those help changing that culture?
That's an excellent question, and I am not sure that I know the answer to that. It could well be the case. You know, I think that the CINECA project is doing as good a job as anyone in trying to understand and take a use case driven approach to identify analyses that can be federated and figure out how those analyses can be done in cloud platforms. I think I can't answer that question, but I am excited to see what happens over the next sort of year or 2 years, as this is a really active area of investment, I think.
Okay, and now we go back to the FAIR data. So the question is, how then do you fix unfair data if you had to set up in a different domain with existing data, e.g. agriculture?
Yeah, it's a good question and an interesting one about, you know, is there one way to do fair data? Should there be one standard that everyone just agrees to, or do we need data that can be adapted between multiple standards and between different domains? I come down on the side of the fence which says, actually, I think there's not one way to do it. I think investing in structuring your data and your metadata in ways that are standards compliant at the point at which you generate it makes it so much easier than it currently is to adapt data between domains, that's the step in the right direction. Trying to get agreement over what the right set of data standards is across multiple different domains is never really a good way to go. It's just too hard. And I fall down on the side of the agree and then figure out how to adapt it later. Adapting fair data to a different domain is much easier than adapting unfair data to be suitable for the analysis that you need to do. I think that would be how I would answer that question. I hope that's satisfactory. I think there will always be a challenge of there are data sets that just don't have enough metadata or just aren't compliant with any standards, and how to exploit those data sets when they might have, how to even discover that those data sets are available is a big challenge. I hope that we can do better at reducing the amount of data that is unfair over time, and that for me would bring the change that we need to then take that next step about increasing our levels of reusability and doing things like making data available for machine readability and artificial intelligence algorithms to automatically mine data sets. But I think there's some steps that we can take before we hit that problem.
Thank you very much, Tony. So that's the questions we got, but I also would like to tell you that there are a couple of comments which says excellent talk and really good talk. So yeah, thank you very much for the talk. And I think it's a good time to finish here because we are almost at the hour now. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending the webinar.
Yes, thank you.